Welcome to this retro episode of the Vital Point podcast. My name is Jonathan Schecter. I'm a transformation coach, breathwork facilitator, and host of the Vital Point podcast. First of all, thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you like the podcast, if you could subscribe to the channel, there's a lot of content here, and we're constantly putting out new episodes of the podcast, in addition to trying to get these retro episodes posted as well. So I wanted to give just a little bit of context about the episode you're about to watch, just so that there's no confusion. If you've watched any of the season 1 episodes, you'll get a much longer intro about how I came up with the podcast and why it's called One Question Wednesday on these original episodes. So check that out if you are interested. Now, season 2 was still originally called One Question Wednesday when it aired on Instagram. And season 2 begins with buying this microphone. The first season didn't have any mics. And it ended when I decided to change the name of the podcast and rebrand it from One Question Wednesday to The Vital Point. And the reason for that is pretty simple. I just started to get better at podcasting, and the conversations that I was having with the guests were starting to get longer and longer and really not follow the one question format in which we started. The other thing was, I was like, why did I decide to call it One Question Wednesday? What if I don't want to publish on Wednesday? Why did I paint myself into that corner? So yeah, there's some amazing guests in this season. We still were recording on Instagram using Instagram Live to build an audience, to build engagement. However, season 2, I also started to notice that maybe Instagram wasn't the best format for a longer podcast. And there were some technical issues on a few of the episodes, including one episode that I wasn't able to salvage for YouTube, just because there were just some quality issues with what happened on the Instagram video. But nonetheless, there's some amazing guests here, some really cool topics, and really starting to get into like what the podcast was about. You know, it started to become more clear to me as I started to get better at hosting. And it's still a little rough, to be honest, in these earlier episodes, but also like what I wanted to do with the podcast. So there's, some somatic experiencing, there's some breath work, there's integration. And the episode ends with a great interview with Matt Gottesman, and then starts the tradition that I've kept up till this point of ending the season with a Q&A. And that was where it started to get more of me doing solo casts instead of just having a guest, which is how we started. So I hope you enjoy this episode that you're about to watch. I hope you are enjoying the new episodes that continue to be posted weekly here on YouTube and on all audio platforms. If you have been checking those out and then you're coming back to this retro episode, you might notice it being a little bit rough around the edges. But hey, that's how we grow. That's how we learn. And we all have to start somewhere, And if you're interested in learning more about breathwork, about psychedelic integration, about how to put some of these practices into your life to transform, definitely click the link below and get my free guide to using breathwork for integration. You'll also be subscribed to my newsletter, and there's all kinds of amazing stuff on there, including news about breathwork circles online that I hold, and if you're in Tucson, events that I hold in person. So again, thank you so much for supporting the show. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you know anybody that it would enjoy these podcasts, please share it with them. And like always, the vital point is to practice. We don't get stronger by reading about push-ups. So one of my goals with the podcast is to share all these different types of practices with you so that you feel inspired to go and practice them. So hope that you enjoy this. Today, I am honored to have Amy Doublet as a guest. Amy is an incredible somatic experiencing therapist. Believe she worked with Peter Levine, who created that modality. And I discovered her earlier this year as she was dispensing her knowledge on Clubhouse about all things somatic therapy. And I am really fascinated by this topic in my own practice, as well as, working with people as well. So I'm really honored to have Amy on the show today. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yes, and somatic experiencing is my primary modality, and Dr. Peter Levine had been working in this way for over 40 years and is definitely a pioneer in the field and has been my mentor for over 12 years. So thank you so much for acknowledging my background as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question for today's show is, what are some practices that you would teach to a new client coming in to help them build their somatic awareness? And I realized as I was typing out that question to you the other night that there was an assumption that I was making in that, which is that awareness is the place where you actually start working with people. So I would love, if I'm completely off base on that, just for you to explain as sort of part of the explanation, your answer, like how does that process work when somebody comes to you new?
Wow. Well, that's a really great question. And as far as I'm concerned, a question that an advanced student would make, because I once had a teacher saying somatic experiencing is not somatic experiencing. And I'll explain what that means. His name was Steve Hoskinson, by the way. I always like to acknowledge my brilliant and prolific instructors. So somatic simply means body, right? So whenever someone says somatic, it means your body. Somatic experiencing is how do you experience yourself in your body? And just like you asked, do we start with the awareness of the body? And the answer is, it depends, on the individual in front of you. I try not to ever make an assumption, but, listening to the language, listening to the intention that the person's coming in with, listening to the level of self-awareness that they have or they're telling you that they have is a good indication of how you're going to work with somebody. And again, not assuming anything and not pathologizing anything. So dissociation is our friend. Dissociation is a way that we leave our body. We maybe go numb emotionally or even physically for reasons that are actually really intelligent reasons. And so I'm never going to try to get somebody to be in their body when they're not feeling safe in their body. So this is a really, really powerful and great question. So thank you for asking it.
Awesome. Yeah. So what would be some of like the beginning type of practices or exercises that you would work with, like that you would prescribe or, help your client with?
Yeah. So first of all, I would notice like how much awareness do they have and how comfortable are they? How often do they spend sort of in their intellectual mind or feeling a little bit checked out or spacey. So kind of getting a feeling of the person. And we all are on that continuum somewhere. Like I forget my keys all the time, or somehow I end up at a place, at a restaurant that I didn't realize, like, wait, when did I get here? We've all experienced that on some level. And then some of us are defended in an intellectual way where everything is in the mind. And that's another way of dissociating from our body. But one of the things I would do is just see if somebody could notice like the weights, from side to side, just asking people to lean from one side to the other side and to notice what they are aware of as their weight goes from one side to the other side. Maybe they're sitting and they can feel it in their sit bones on the chair, or maybe they're standing and they can feel their weight going from one foot to the other foot. And that's a way of helping people like check into their body, because first of all, it's a new language, right? Very few of us are taught to check in with ourselves in that way. And so we're teaching a new language. So we really take the shame out of the answer of, I don't know, I don't feel anything. And it's okay to give the answer, I don't know. And to be able to psychoeducate, simply educate that this is a new language and it's going to take time, and you've probably never been asked to notice your body before. I work with a lot of somatic people in the sense of their profession is working with the body. People that own Pilates studios and teach Pilates for a living. I had this one person say, "Oh my gosh," this level of shame came up because they said, "I own all these studios and I make my living teaching people how to use their body, and I'm not even connected with my own body." And it's a different way of being that we're not. It's not taught. It's not even hardly ever spoken about until now. This whole wave of the trauma field, it's starting to come in, and a lot of therapists are confused in the sense that they should be asking the person about their body every other sentence. But that's not the answer either if somebody isn't able to connect with their body.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So there is a whole process, like you're asking, like, well, how do we do that? How do we get back in? Well, first of all, to normalize the fact that it's okay that you're not able to, or you don't know how, or you don't feel anything, right?
Yeah.
Because maybe it's safer to numb out. And so then there's going to be a process of gentle touching in, feel the weight of your body as you walk, from foot to foot.
Yeah. I think for me, in my experience, I worked with mindfulness meditation for so long, and then coming into somatic practices, there was a lot of overlap in some of those beginning, awareness stages. It was like, oh, okay, there's already some awareness of my body just from paying attention to my breath for 20 years, right? Yeah. But once I started to pay attention to my body, like you were saying, like a whole new language opened up, a whole new world of awareness of things that, I just had been pretty much ignoring during the mindfulness work, right? Just, okay, I'm just going to go back to my breath, whatever I'm noticing. But I did love how much overlap there was. Like it was already familiar to me to, be able to be curious about what was happening and notice different sensations.
Absolutely. And curiosity really is that buzzword right now, along with vulnerability, right? But the curiosity really does open up this childlike wonder, what might happen if I actually take a walk and notice the way the weight moves from side to side, and like, what does that open up? And we compartmentalize a lot, not only through our mind, but through our body. We clamp down in our joints to hold, to contain, to not allow that flow to happen, because if that flow happens, we just might feel something intolerable. So we might clamp down through our joints. And so as you move through space, as you do breath work, you're allowing those joints to become more buoyant and open up, so you're going to start feeling more too.
Yeah. I love that curiosity is so front and center there. That's wonderful to me, and just a wonderful way to frame it to people. Just being open and curious and childlike, I believe is what you said.
Exactly. And it allows the imaginal. I can disinhibit a little bit here and not take myself so seriously, and my body has a language of its own. There's a reason why. Yeah, a very appropriate drop there when we disconnected. It is very scary to go into the pain, and I just brought up physical pain, and we vanished. So here we are. It's like, no, I'm not going there.
Yeah, well, it's been funny with this, with my shoulder. It's been something I've been dealing with for most of the year, and we just took my car yesterday to get an oil change, and they said, hey, you need this new ball joint on your tire arm. And I said, well, what does that do? And they said, well, it's just like your shoulder, you've got this ball joint, it goes inside, and it's really like cracked, and you really need to get it changed, because if it breaks, the tire just sort of falls off. And I just thought it was so funny that like that's sort of what they did to my shoulder. So
Wow.
it's like metaphorically it was happening in my external world as well as the internal. So that's
Yeah.
funny that we had the pain. So
So
yeah,
fascinating.
so I'm sorry. Yes, you were saying being checked out and really starting to get in touch with, the weight and being open, being more buoyant.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
even just going with that in your shoulder, like what comes up for you as you share that is something, that's how you touch into someone's experience and where they are with their awareness in their body, so as you recognize this metaphor, whether it was in real time or you had to sit with it for a
Mhm.
while, like, is there something that came up for you? It could have been emotional, it could have been an intellectual realization. Um,
Yeah. You know what's really interesting? Thank you for asking that, because that reminded me of talking to you on Clubhouse for the first time, and you said something similar. And it was the first time where like all of a sudden I kind of zoomed in on what was happening in my body as I would talk about my injury. And I started to notice that like my voice would start to get a little bit higher. I'd start to tremble a little bit. There was all these very subtle things that if I wasn't paying attention or somebody hadn't pointed it out to me, I might have, completely lost, right? It's like walking past the same place every day and not noticing something that's there.
Absolutely. And that circles back to our conversation around language, right? You said trembling. And so the language of the body is sensation, right? So you're noticing trembling or shaking or warmth or coolness or prickles or tingles. And so
Yeah.
your ability to notice that there's something trembling in there is, it's a start. Like yeah, I actually noticed this, and you're not putting any meaning on it. You're not like necessarily putting an emotion on it. It's just like, okay, yeah, it's trembling. Let me just sit with this and observe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting experience, going from working with complex trauma to working with that big T trauma, shock trauma. Um, it's like familiar in a lot of ways, but the intensity is so much more, like so much more overwhelming. So um, it's like I guess I would compare it to like if somebody tells you about a place you're going to visit. So there's some familiarity with it, but it's nothing like actually being there and experiencing it for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Um, so, but yeah, it's really transformed the way that I am experiencing life and able to apply some of those resources that, a couple of years ago, um, had a different context. It's like, okay, I can use these when I'm talking about things from my parents' divorce or my divorce or, stressful things. But they're not there. They're not happening all the time. And then all of a sudden with the shock trauma, it was like, oh no, this is happening all the time. So it's familiar and I have resources to start to work with it and to sit with it, like you're saying, and without judgment, with curiosity.
Yes. And as you said, the shoulder is, you know, the the somatic part of maybe an emotional experience. You brought up not just one but two divorces, and so I'm going to assume there's emotion around that, but without making the assumption, also know that the shoulders are an extension of our heart. The shoulders and the arms come out of our heart, and um, so that would be a direction to for inquiry, compassionate inquiry, like, what is coming up for you, and seeing, where you're able to tolerate being in connection with that is how I might work with you. So everyone
Hmm.
is different, right, in their capacity to be present with their body, but they first need the language, you know.
Got it.
Yeah. So
I
if somebody doesn't have the language, it also doesn't imply that they don't have the capacity.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a matter more of experience and exposure to that language.
Right.
Yeah. I definitely find that fascinating about the SE work, is like how much you're able to tap into these really subtle cues. You know, I know that there's body cues that you're looking for, but just, you know, just what you're able to glean from us having this conversation right here. You know, it's I find it really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes into parts work too. Now IFS is taking off in a big way, but
Right.
there's so much to parts work that's, not exclusive to IFS, but it's one modality. But the pain in the body is a part of us, a part
Right.
living in that pain that's wanting our attention.
Hmm.
So to be able to tolerate the intolerable experiences that you don't have to relive, but you want to connect to and hear,
Yeah.
and see what messages there are there, right?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was actually going to bring up IFS, and I wasn't, I wasn't sure if we should go down that road. So yeah, they seem to be so complementary to each other. And especially, with what we were talking about earlier with that curiosity and that childlike wonder, to me, that just fits so perfectly with the IFS, because so often the parts of us that are holding on to the trauma in our body are very young parts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And these modalities are a way of hanging our hat on a hook to have language, but the concepts existed before some of these people, right? Like, I mean,
Right.
a lot of them are founded in bioenergetics and Wilhelm Reich, and like nothing is new in that sense. So not to minimize any of these founders, but it's also, there's a huge body of work that's not limited to
Mm-hmm.
Peter or Dick Schwartz or anybody else, Pat Ogden. There's so many brilliant people out there that are doing very similar work, just different language.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting thought for me, which is I was just having this conversation the other day with somebody that it's not so much that the information and the solutions aren't available. It's how you're, the container that you're placing it in, and the sequencing of it, and the process and the habits that you're building. I often think of this analogy within Buddhism of, these Tibetan monks and lamas going over the Himalayas, to visit India, and bringing back, one or two texts, after years of traveling and, risking their lives and years of study and travel, right? And I can just turn on my phone and get hundreds, if not thousands, of those teachings, right?
Yeah.
In the snap of a finger. So it's not so much about like these this medicine, whatever it is, whether it's somatic work, breath work, meditation, parts work. It's not a matter of they're not available to us, but like, how are we applying them? Because
Right.
it's all the information's there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all have, the founder of cranial synchro work, Dr. Sutherland, we all have an inner physician. We have this, organic intelligence, Steve Hoskinson would say, that this that lives inside of us and that knows and trumps anybody. I don't presume to know what is right for another person, but I'm happy to explore and hold space. And it's an exploration with childlike wonder, right? Into what is your body communicating, and if you can't tap into your body, well, let's work in that direction where it's tolerable for you to be present in the here and now, and close some of those windows that we have all this RAM for survival energy. Like, what if we closed those windows and that program didn't have to operate, so that you could have presence here right now, and you could be in connection with yourself and your body. And ultimately, it's interesting that you mentioned Tibetan Buddhism, because I'm actually in a study right now with Lama Glenn Mullen. He's translated over like 35 texts, and works closely with the Dalai Lama, and I'm in practice with him right now. And And you're absolutely right. I was like, wait a minute, this is a whole way of life. Like, I'm not just going to take this 16 weeks and think that I have a practice or know anything. Like, this is you soak this in through being a way of being life. And it's the same with the relationship with ourselves, tapping into who we are and self-realizing who we actually are through the messages of our body, but also our emotions and our intellect, all three, right? Body, mind, soul.
Yeah. I love that metaphor of our, our cognitive and our body processes as windows, and having a finite amount of resources like RAM. So that's awesome. Well, I do want to be, respectful of your time. I know we've asked more than one question today, and I'm sorry for that. I just couldn't help myself. If there's anybody in the audience that had a question for Amy before we wrap up, I'd love to hear it. You can just type it into the comment box. But while folks are thinking about that, where can people learn more about you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, well, my practice is pretty full, but my website is wellnessalchemist.com. I'm probably moving in the direction of retreats at some point. For now, yeah, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them by email, or you can ping me on my Instagram. I haven't been so active, but hopefully I'll come back and spend a little more time. And I truly appreciate you having me on, Jonathan. And I know you're doing great body work out in the world as well. And just wanted to recap if there's any questions coming in before we do that. The primary question is, how do we get more in touch with our soma, our body? And there's different ways that work for different people. And again, it depends on your level of safety and how safe you feel in your body. If we don't feel safe in our body, we're not really going to be connected to the experience of it. But also, if we don't know the language, we're not going to be connected to that experience. So one is learning the language, that the language is sensation, that you might feel hot, you might feel cool, you might feel prickly or tingly. And so now you know what to look for. Like, oh, something feels uneasy. Oh, there's a tension in my belly. That's the language. And then also to look for what feels right, what feels good in the body. Oh, I took a deep breath. When I noticed that the leaves in the trees are moving and dancing, and it made me smile, and I took a deep breath, and I feel an expansion in my chest. That's a way of tapping into your body. So that was a question you started out with.
Yeah.
How do we become more aware of our physical sensations in our body? And that's one way, is to look for what is right, what feels good, what feels neutral to good, in our experience. And it could be the way that your shoulders relax when you feel relief, or the deeper breath you take when you realize like everything's okay. And so I would just encourage people to notice when they're experiencing a goodness, like a pleasurable conversation, or a texture that they like. Like in the wintertime, I love to wear cashmere, and I just feel the texture of it, and it makes me smile, and I feel an expansion in my chest. So what can you orient around that specifically for you is a goodness, and then notice the sensation inside. And that's one way that you can start to orient to your body and feel comfortable in the body.
Awesome. Those are some great suggestions. Coming up with textures, thoughts, and just noticing sensations. I love that idea of like the fabric or the texture that you find pleasurable, just having that as a resource to kind of rely on.
Any sensation. It could be the eye, like aesthetically pleasing, your favorite color, or it could be a texture or a taste or a sound. So you could use any of your senses. You could listen to your favorite music and then notice if there's a sensation that arises in your body after the song is over.
Awesome. Well, Amy, I so appreciate your time and for sharing your wisdom and experience with us. Thanks, so, I would love to do it again sometime, or maybe do a clubhouse room together.
I'm happy to.
Yeah, that would be great. All right. So thanks everybody for tuning in. This was One Question Wednesday. We'll be back next Wednesday with Tristan Victor, who's a men's coach. So I'm looking forward to that as well. And thanks for tuning in today with me, Jonathan Schecter, and Amy Doublet. Until next time, guys.